let's get into our first segment here for the People's Panic Meter. This is on pass catchers here to start. Let's get into the first one, which is from James Z, who sends this in on Rome Odunze. Is it time to panic about Odunze? I know you're an Odunze bro. I am too. But 3 of the 4 previous weeks have been disappointing, including this goose egg against the Bengals. It seems like he has a drop issue and isn't really being used as the alpha wide receiver 1 like in the first 4 weeks. Also, not to mention that his heel has been bothering for him a bit. Panic? Love the show. All right, Boone. What's the panic level on Rome Odunze? You know I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I want to hear what you think first.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what your take is. For me, it's still just some panic. And I know I said I was spicy off the top, but this one I'm not overreacting on yet. And I wonder what you've uncovered in all your research. But I agree. I get the frustration that 3 of the last 4 weeks since the bye have been essentially he's just been dragging your fantasy team down. Yes, so that is unfortunate. And this matchup on paper with the Bengals, you thought it was a good one, but their corner, DJ Turner, he's been playing really, really well this year. I probably didn't factor that in enough, to be honest, in terms of where I had him ranked. I really didn't necessarily think that he was going to spend a ton of time with Odunze and factor in that much, but they're able to take on number 1 receivers and really slow them down. We saw that here. So you end up with Odunze's worst outing of the season, and yet he's still just 1 week removed from a 100-yard game. Like, how much can we panic here when we saw 2 weeks ago this guy go out and put up over 100 yards? So some panic for the fact that he's shown now that he can be erased, that he can have these down weeks more often than not. And yet, I mean, the Giants and the Steelers are 2 of his next 3 here, Harmon. So I think he's going to get going again. I only have it at some panic. Where do you stand on him?
I think that is the correct answer, is some panic. Because, look, obviously, I want to say this off the top. I understand. I can sit here and talk about wide receiver volatility till the cows come home, and I will, and how you do just kind of have to ride the wave at this position, and you just got to deal with slow stretches, bad games, and yet it is extra difficult to look at the damn 0 in your fantasy lineup. Okay, I've got Rome Odunze teams. Some of them I'm going to survive the 0. Some of them I might be counting on some players on Monday Night Football, and I will not pull a Boone here and curse any of those players. They shall remain nameless. Gonna leave it at that. But so I understand. It's just tough to look at that 0. It's frustrating to look at that 0, especially because, like, this post that we're showing here from our fantasy handle, like, did Rome Odunze drop this potential touchdown pass? Well, it got tipped, and then it's not where he expects it to be. So it hits his hands. Like, he should catch it. And I like the drop issue thing. I wouldn't say he's had drop issues, but he has not brought in difficult but catchable targets this year. Like, he's had some mistakes in contested catch situations. He has had some drops. Like, and I've said that throughout the course of the year. If we're calling balls and strikes here, that's been a problem for him. I don't think it will be a long-term problem. I think it can get corrected. This is a guy who had great hands in his rookie year. It's a guy who had great hands in his collegiate charting profile. Like, this is not something I think is going to be a long-term stressor for him. So, and I also want to remind people too, think back to week 6, what we said when he had kind of a down game, 2 catches for 32 yards. He had a touchdown in that game that got wiped off the board due to an illegal shift penalty. So some of the results in that game are even a little bit misleading. The Saints game, they just established the run. And then week 8, he has 100 yards, to your point. He was top 15 among all pass catchers in yards per game if you remove this goose egg game, which I realize is the game that we're focusing on here. So I just want to, again, remind people that, yes, it's been a little bit up and down here. I don't think Rome Odunze is a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. I don't think he's yet proven to be like an elite number 1 receiver. He's a second-year player. So I'm not totally kind of just saying, yes, he's like a Drake London type. Drake London's in his 4th year. You suffer through that kind of down couple stretches from him, but now he's back to producing like a freak show because he's in the prime of his career. Rome Odunze is not quite there yet. He's not quite in that stratosphere. However, I do want to talk about this week 9 matchup, and you mentioned DJ Turner, and I agree with you that I also did not put enough emphasis on that when talking about Rome, although I don't even think we talked about Rome Odunze because he's a guy that you just view as a set and forget type player. So kind of follow me down this little rabbit hole here. In terms of the DJ Turner thing, if you look at the players that have actually thumped this Bengals defense from like a pass, like a receiving perspective, it's not been a lot of number 1 wide receivers. It's been tight ends. It's been like Colson Loveland. number one in terms of most receiving yards put up against the Bengals. Number 2 is Pat Freiermuth. Number 3 is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Number 4 is Sam Laporta. Number 5 is Matthew Golden. Like, these are all guys, slot receivers, tight ends. You just look at top 16 in terms of most yards put up against the Bengals this year. It's Josh Jacobs, Olamide Zaccheaus, Harold Fannin, Dylan Sampson, Tyler Johnson, Jerry Jeudy, Marvin Mims, DJ Moore, Justin Jefferson, Parker Washington, Cortland Sutton, and then those 5 that I mentioned at the top. It's a lot of running backs, tight ends. It's not big games like Cortland Sutton, even 81 yards against the Bengals. Justin Jefferson, 75 yards against the Cincinnati Bengals. So it's these number one receivers, because DJ Turner is so good, and he did track Rome Odunze around the field for most of last week's game. I think the Bears knew that going into it, and are saying, hey, let's build the game plan around Colson Loveland, around the slot receiver, around DJ Moore as kind of this gadget guy, around our trick plays, which we saw, and of course, Kyle Monangai in the ground game. And the last point of this, and this is the only reason I'm a little concerned going forward, is this heel injury for Rome Odunze. He mentioned that it popped up and kind of got exaggerated, aggravated during the Ravens game. I do wonder if, again, that's another reason why he was just kind of removed from the game plan with only 3 targets in this one, because that is an extreme outlier in terms of his targets per route run. Because otherwise, like, yeah, last week against the Ravens, 29%, 24% the week before. That's been clearly the outlier in terms of his target level. So those are kind of my theories on what happened in this past week's game.
Well, I will say, to put a bow on the whole thing, the fact that they did still have success as an offense, I think, is a bit of the positive here, right? Like, if they went out and struggled and Caleb looked terrible and all those things that have happened in previous weeks, if that occurred again here in overall what was a great matchup, then I would be more concerned about Odunze, because I'd just be concerned about the entire environment there in Chicago and that offense. And yet, because they were able to still move the ball, they were able to score. I think that's going to be the positive to take away, and that it will still be Odunze's week some weeks moving forward, including, I think, some of the easier matchups coming up. But we're going to have to pay attention to that heel injury, because, yeah, I think there's a few guys out there that are kind of playing through things at this point, and you just assume that if they're active on Sunday, they're okay and they're good to go. But yeah, some of these guys might be playing at 70, 80%, right? And if they're not 100% and they're going against a quality player on the opposite side of the ball, you might not see the same kind of results. So we'll keep an eye on that this week. We'll see what his practice participation is like. But yeah, I'm not freaking out about Odunze. I still think he's a good talent. I still going to rank him as, a high-end wide receiver too, who still has that wide receiver 1 upside some weeks. And let's hope more weeks than not the rest of the way, even though it's a mix of good matchups and bad matchups. It's not like he's got a cupcake schedule for the rest of the season.
Yeah, just to put the final point in the DJ Turner part of all of this, Pro Football Focus grades, people have their feelings on it. I'm just saying, like, let's get into the ballpark of what these players are. The Bengals defense, the grades from PFF are obviously all terrible, except for 2 players, Trey Hendrickson and DJ Turner, the only guys that are above 65 in their grades. Trey Hendrickson, 82.9, DJ Turner, 73 overall. And from a coverage perspective, DJ Turner is actually the 4th highest graded cornerback according to Pro Football Focus. He's only allowed 47 targets against him to be 47% of the targets against him to be completed. So that is definitely something that I think Ben Johnson noticed and said, hey, my number 1 wide receiver, who is already starting to draw like extra defensive attention against the Ravens, they were assigning him some double team stuff like that. Let's just I hate to say it, let's just sacrifice him in this game and we'll get it done in other ways, which, to your point, was something that this offense needed to prove, right? They needed to get some of these other threats going. Everybody knows that. We know that. So we'll move forward with and accept some of the volatility with the Odunze, but I do think he's someone that you were still starting every single week. If he goes out and thumps the Giants next week, you would be 0% surprised by that as long as he is healthy. Let's stick in wide receiver volatility zone here and get to Zach S. on DK Metcalf, who titled it DK Metcalf Ghosting Like It's Still Halloween. Big fan of the show. My panic for this week is the DK Metcalf situation. He nearly put up a goose egg this week, but has been volatile throughout the season. DK standing for, don't know where the rest of expected fantasy points has went. He only surpassed 60 receiving yards in 3 games this season, and his 5 receiving touchdowns this year have been helped bail him out from some of his performances. Should DK Metcalf be viewed as a boom bust flex wide receiver going forward based on the Steelers' script? What do we think about DK Metcalf going forward, Justin Boone?
it's only some panic for me here. And part of it is, what was the expectation for DK Metcalf this season? Like, is he not coming
Yeah.
through exactly how you would have expected? Like, this isn't a ceiling outcome. He's not marrying the volume and the big plays and the touchdowns and having like an absolutely massive season, but he's producing like a top 20 receiver. That's what he is in fantasy points per game right now. As Zach here wrote in, he's got 5 touchdowns in 8 games. He's gone over 80 yards in 3 games. Like, this is what we expected. This is a good season from DK Metcalf. It's not a league winning season, but to talk about him as like a flex play, I think that's way, way too far down. He's been much more consistent than that with the touchdowns, with the yardage. So he's going to pay off. It might take, a trip to the end zone, or it might take some big plays, but that's the kind of receiver he is. And he's a pretty solid wide receiver too, in my mind, for fantasy the rest of the season. So I'm not really sure, like, he's got a bit of a name, but could you really trade him for that much? Are you really improving your roster somewhere else? Like, if you have a surplus at receiver, sure, then maybe you can move him for a running back or something like that. But overall, I don't know that you're going to get like great value for somebody like DK Metcalf, but I do think he is a solid wide receiver too in your lineup. So just some panic for me. He's not hitting the ceiling outcome, like I said, but I don't really know what this person was expecting from DK, that they would be panicking this much based on what he's done so far.
Yeah, I think he is a boom bust flex wide receiver, in my opinion. I mean, I think he's more of like a high end 3 than maybe a low end 2, high end 3. He's somewhere in that borderline because he's 32nd in team target share and he's 18th in team air yard share. So I think somewhere in the middle there, if we're talking about his share of like the overall opportunity in his offense, because to me, if he was going to be a consistent player every single week, he was going to have to be something closer to like a 28% target share player, because we know it's going to be very run heavy. It's going to be a slow paced offense. And that just hasn't really been the case. So I do think there's, I think some panic is probably the right answer if we're putting it on the scale here, because I think it's about the expectations. And to me, I think, yeah, he's going to be a guy who is volatile. He's going to be boom bust. And the boom weeks might be a little bit more like, not 150 yards and 2 touchdowns or something like that. It looks a little bit more like what we saw against the Minnesota Vikings, which I think has got to probably be his biggest game so far this season.
The other thing that I suppose we should mention, and it's kind of weird timing with us recording this on Monday before the Monday Nighter with the trade deadline on Tuesday, is the Steelers have been rumored for a while now to be in the market for a second receiver. So if they did go out and get a Jacoby Myers or someone like that, that could definitely change the equation here for DK Metcalf, and we'd have to reassess at that point. But to me right now, yeah, I think low-end wide receiver 2, who's, a bit of a boomer bust play, but a guy who's shown so far that he's getting it done. Aaron Rodgers is looking for him in the end zone. They're coming through with that. Yes, touchdowns can be volatile, but the fact that he's produced the way he has so far this year, even though he has relied on the touchdowns, I think we should be happy with that. And I think if you have him as a wide receiver 2 in your lineup, you're doing well. I don't think that he's somebody that you really need to panic about that much.
I would totally hate it if the next time he does turn in one of those 100-yard games and a touchdown, if you maybe tried to trade him for somebody that's a little bit more reliable, or if you need help at a different position. They do have Marquez Valdes-Scantling in Pittsburgh right now. That probably doesn't really move the needle very much. It'll just be in their rotation cast of wide receiver 2s, unless they trade for someone at the deadline. Like, I do think if they get a Jacoby Myers type player in here, that complicates the picture a little bit, because again, he's only exceeded 7 targets once this year, and he's been kind of in that 6 to 4 to 5 range in a good bit of games here. So I wouldn't mind it if you shipped off Metcalf at some point, but yeah, it's just all about the expectations here. Next one comes in from Anthony on Justin Jefferson. Really appreciate and enjoy the show. How do we feel about Jefferson with how low the passing volume is from JJ McCarthy? I will not share with the people here, Boone, what you texted me in the middle of JJ McCarthy's hot start to this game. But
that is one of those ones when, as soon as I hit send, I was like, oh man, he's definitely going to screen grab that and put it on the show. There's no doubt.
No,
I will share it. We can tell everyone. I made the joke going back to my bold prediction before the season when I didn't say that he was going to be the next Patrick Mahomes, but I just brought up Patrick Mahomes' second year, his first year as a starter. And I just said that we've seen other quarterbacks who didn't do much the rookie season, who are in a good environment, come through and post a very strong second season in their first season as a starter. And I definitely at the time said he's not going to throw for 5,000 yards. He's not going to throw for 50 touchdowns. He's not going to put up those kind of numbers, but that he could have a good year. And yet, obviously, things went very south very quickly early in the season. Then he gets hurt, comes out here. And in the first half of the game, he looked pretty good in the first half of the game, I thought. And maybe that's, he felt comfortable with the scripted plays that they have, that sort of thing. But he definitely looked good in the first half. And I texted you, I believe something along the lines of JJ McCarthy, the next Patrick Mahomes, ha ha ha. And what was your response? Something along the lines of like, it's back in play.
It's back on the table.
Like
it's back in.
There you go.
Back on the table.
And yet in the second half, not quite as good, right? We saw a little more of the JJ McCarthy that we saw for the better part of week 1 and for pretty much all of week 2, where it was a bit more of a struggle. But at least he comes out with a pretty solid game here fantasy wise. At least he was able to help the team get the win. Like, this is what we need. We need small steps. He's not going to be a superstar right out of the gate. We need signs of life. We need them to be doing some positive things. And we saw some positive things in this game. I think Jefferson's a tough one because people aren't getting like the week winning performances. And while we talked about a guy like DK Metcalf, when it was like, well, you don't really expect DK Metcalf to do that every single week or that often. He's just going to have a few every year. Jefferson, you absolutely expect this to happen more often than not, right? You think that he's going to be able to go out and have 20, maybe 30-point games and lead you to victories by himself. That's why you drafted him where you drafted him. So this is kind of tough. He's still giving you double-digit fantasy points most weeks. So that's been pretty good, right? Almost every single week giving you 10-plus fantasy points. But because of where you drafted him, that's where you have to assess the panic here. And I wonder if he's a guy who you could potentially cash in on his name. Maybe somebody out there is excited about potentially getting him down the stretch. And you could try to get him off your roster and get somebody back that you feel more confident in. But I have a hard time getting away from JJ when, he's remained fairly productive this year, even though he hasn't had the monster games. And even in the 3 games with McCarthy, like I'm looking at it right here, like he's found the end zone twice. He had 81 yards in the other game. So it's not like he's been bad in those games overall from a production standpoint. He's still top 5 in receiving yards. We still got the Monday Nighter to go tonight, but top 5 heading into the Monday Nighter here in receiving yards on the season. And if you look at the schedule is pretty good. He only plays one team that isn't a plus matchup the rest of the way for fantasy receivers. And then in the fantasy playoffs, the Cowboys, the Giants, and the Lions, they're all top 10 in fantasy points allowed to wideouts. So I kind of think trading Jefferson would be a mistake. I get it if you're frustrated. I get it because, like I said, he is kind of a name that I think you could get something decent back for. And yet I would be holding on to him. I would see where this offense can go because, I just look at that schedule and I think about the fantasy playoffs, and I would feel like a fool if I traded away a guy like Justin Jefferson, knowing he has that schedule in the fantasy playoffs and then watching him go off for another team.
I think that's fair. I think some panic is probably warranted just because they have really ripped the volume out of this offense when JJ McCarthy's been under center, and it's been much more drop back friendly with Carson Wentz, who's a veteran. That's not that surprising. So I want to advise some patience here on just labeling McCarthy. He is this or he is that. I think he had some good moments last week. I also think he had some really bad moments last week. And just the fact that he did have some tangible good moments was a sign of progress because we didn't really see much of that in his first 2 starts outside of kind of the comeback mode against the Chicago Bears in week 1. So I think it is going to be a bit of a moving target for McCarthy and obviously Justin Jefferson and how he can go along with him. So some panic here, but I really like your point about the schedule and how that can hopefully when McCarthy is getting ramped up, it aligns with that schedule and Jefferson finishes really strong. He's somebody I'd probably want to try to hang on to throughout the rest of the season. He's still wide receiver 12 in points per game right now, which I realize that's not what you drafted him for, but it's not as if it's been a complete stone cold disaster for him. Yeah. Next one here, Travis sends us in on 2 underperforming wide receivers. I'd like to pick Harmon's reception perception brain on 2 depth wideouts who are massively underperforming, Keon, Coleman, and Darnell Mooney. I know these guys didn't have massive expectations this season, but they're still a big letdown. Is Mooney still hurt? He had some big games last year in terms of production, but this year had several one-catch games. As for Coleman, we've been waiting for someone on the Bills to emerge, and we thought it would be him after a big week 1, but that was a fluke, it seems. Kincaid seems to be the guy that has emerged there. What are your thoughts on these 2? Let's start with Keon Coleman on your Bills first. I think I said to you at one point in the offseason, Boone, that it kind of feels like either one of Dalton Kincaid or Keon Coleman needs to step forward for this offense. I think we know which one of them has done that so far.
Yeah, and you mentioned at the top of the show that we could probably sit down one week and go over all the players that we'd be willing to put in Coping Corner that we just haven't gotten questions on. I feel like I would have put Coleman in Coping Corner a month ago, a few weeks ago. Like,
Yeah.
this is a long time coming for him. It hasn't happened, right? He hasn't topped 45 receiving yards since week one, like the person mentioned there. Only scored 2 touchdowns on the year, so you would have hoped like maybe he could be a double-digit touchdown scorer. That could get him home for fantasy. That's not happening. He's just not making an impact. And I always bring up when we do the waiver wire section every week, I bring up that on the waiver wire, when you're looking at receivers, there are a lot of guys that are in like that wide receiver 4 flex range, guys that you could go pick up any given week pretty much and slot into your lineup if you need that sort of desperation play, if you had injuries or bye weeks or all that sort of stuff that you're dealing with. That's all Coleman is right now. Like, he's a touchdown or bust version of that. So I don't really know why you need to hold him on your roster even, right? Why are you carrying him if you could just go to the waiver wire and get that at a moment's notice when you need it? I would much rather pick someone up that has more upside, a guy that could potentially turn into a difference maker for your team. Because I think at this point, we just know that Coleman's not going to do it. I don't know if you want to comment on that before we get to the Mooney part of it all, but yeah, for me, Coleman he's dead in the water for fantasy this season. We might see the odd game where he finds the end zone or has a big play, but overall, get him away from your lineups and get him away from your rosters.
It was the week 5 game that he was benched in the first quarter because of like disciplinary issues, right? The Patriots game. Yeah. Okay, so then ever since then, Keon Coleman's route participation has gone 83%, 76% to 73%. Like, he's dipped in terms of playing time on a weekly basis ever since then. He just saw 2 targets in this past week's game. Like, yeah, the Bills are trying to find other answers because I think they know what Keon Coleman is. And like, I don't even want to talk about my big slot theory about him anymore because like the team has never shown any desire to use him that way. And Khalil Shakir is their best receiver and he plays in the slot. So like, it's not happening for Keon Coleman. I agree with you. I would have been comfortable. I mean, I've never been in on Coleman as a perimeter X receiver, and I definitely, outside of the fourth quarter in week 1, I could have put him in the Coping Corner at any time. So yeah, go ahead. We could throw him in the Coping Corner. That is what it is. We'll see if anything changes for him. The rest of his career is more what I'm interested in. This season, it is what it is in terms of Keon Coleman there. Should we move to Mooney here? I think I don't want to bury Keon anymore.
To Mooney. I don't know if you have thoughts you want to give off the top here. For me, it's total panic, but I would be willing, if you want to make a case for Coping Corner, I would be willing to listen to it on this one because, I mean, it's total panic. You want to say that it's just been an injury plague season and that the further removed from the injury he gets, that we'll start to at least see some version of the player that we've seen in the past who's been more productive in previous years. But at the moment, I think, and a large part of it is because of the injuries, it just seems like a lost season, right? Like only 1 game over 45 yards. He's been held to 1 catch in each of the last 2 outings here. It's not happening for him either. And you can wait around, you can hope that it happens, but what's the ceiling for him? How much better could he be than one of those wide receiver 4 flexes who are always available on the waiver wire? I don't know that it's that great based on, a healthy Drake London being there, getting the kind of volume that he could draw. It would take a London injury. And even when that happened a couple weeks ago, we didn't see Mooney come through in that spot. So yeah, I'd be willing. Do you want to make a case for Coping Corner on him? Cause I'm like teetering total panic Coping Corner kind of.
Yeah, I just think he's a Coping Corner guy because what are you really going to get from Darnell Mooney at this point? It has been a super strange season for Mooney. The injuries, the coaching staff also kind of called him out at one point. I think it was after the Panthers game mentioned that, but he just hasn't really been all that involved. And let's also be real about who Darnell Mooney is. He's a guy who's had kind of up years and down years throughout his career. He's not just been a metronome type player in terms of consistency on a year-to-year basis. So this could just be one of those years where it was great last year. It's down this year. And quite frankly, I don't think the Falcons should be trying to get him involved because, as I've consistently brought up on the show, the offense is only good. Michael Penix is only good when he's hyper targeting Drake London. I sometimes think with young quarterbacks, the less you can put on their plate, the better. And Penix seems to be one of those guys in terms of, hey, this is your number 1 read. Go to him over and over and over again. That might not lead to a winning formula, but the Falcons aren't going anywhere this year anyways. So, and they're going to give a top 15 draft pick to the damn Rams.
And I'm down for the coping corner thing. I will say though, the one element that just kept me on the verge and kept me at the high end of total panic is the matchup this week. They're going against the Colts. They give up the fourth most fantasy points to wide receivers.
Yeah.
This is the best
Yeah.
matchup that the Falcons have actually had this season. Like, it's not like their schedule has been absolutely brutal, but on paper, this is the best matchup. So if there was ever a time for Mooney to do something, but I don't even think he's a player that if he goes out and has a huge game that you could then turn around and trade him for anything, right? So I don't think there's any reason to necessarily hold on to him or to keep him out of the coping corner here. So let's do it.
Yeah, maybe you want to bet on his like over under receiving prop. That maybe that's the way to do it, because not only has the Colts secondary been beatable, but they have been kind of specifically beatable by these smaller, speedier type receivers. I think about Troy Franklin earlier in the season. Even Calvin Austin led the Steelers in receiving yards last week, and he is kind of that smaller, speedier guy. So, but even then, you're not going to trust him in the next week if he goes out there. So, what's really the point? I think he's a coping corner type of player here.